Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's webinar series. The title for April's CLACO webinar series is Trade Solutions in Asia, specifically sourcing structures that can be developed. When foreign companies are sourcing or manufacturing in Asia, they may face unique challenges such as language barriers, communication problems, cultural differences, the method of handling payments, product quality issues, trademark patent issues, logistics shipping, as well as general trade flow problems. Finding capable, reliable, and trustworthy manufacturers and suppliers in Asia, whether it is in China, Vietnam, Bangladesh, etc., who can consistently manufacture and supply high-quality goods at competitive prices is always a daunting task. Establishing and maintaining good business relationships with them, which is essential for successful procurement in Asia, requires enormous effort, patience, time, and resources. Developing the appropriate Asian structure is of vital importance in order to be able to achieve success. In this webinar series, we have developed various business models that can be integrated into the global structure of a company depending on the risk and commitment level needed by a company. As mentioned, welcome to CLACO Group's webinar series. This was a brief introduction to today's webinar. Before we begin, I would just like to make sure that everybody could hear me clearly. If you did, please raise your hands. It allows me to test whether the system is working well. In addition, the presentation as well as a recording of this webinar will be distributed to you at the end of today's session. And as a consequence, there will be no need to take notes for you during the webinar. If you do have questions, please do be interactive and proactive and insert them in the questions section of the panel box. We may not have time today to answer your questions, but we will for sure email you separately to answer them. For those of you that are new to CLACO Group's webinar series, I would just like to briefly introduce who we are. We are an international accounting and management consulting firm that was established in Hong Kong in 1979. Hong Kong is still our global headquarter. We have over 120 professionals that are working throughout our 10 offices. Our head office in China is based in Shanghai, and we have 7 other offices as well. We also have a Singapore office that was newly opened just over a year and a half ago. The services that we provide are corporate administrative services, assisting clients in entering new markets in Asia, in the jurisdictions that we operate in, and helping them with all the maintenance and ongoing work that's required. One of our unique aspects is that we do speak over 8 languages internally, giving us the capability to speak with our clients in their native tongue. A little bit about myself. My name is Christina Kohler. I'm a director at CLACO Group. I've been with the firm for over 11 years when I started as its China director in 2003. I've been assisting clients mainly entering the China market, but also the Singapore and Hong Kong market in terms of joint venture structures, wholly foreign-owned enterprises, representative offices, and also M&A transactions. I've also been assisting clients with the shutdown of their businesses, particularly in terms of liquidation processes. And I'm also co-author of our monthly magazine, ChinaInvest.biz, which can be easily subscribed to free of charge on our website by just inserting your email address. So to start today's webinar, I would like to start off by those of you that may be at the initial stages of your market entry into Asia. There's a series of questions that I ask my clients when they are starting to develop their Asian business, which helps them to create their business plan. The questions basically are who, what, where, why, and when. But there are additional assessment tools that can be utilized to see whether a company is ready to actually enter a market. And I want to not only look at these questions that are listed here, but also look at these additional questions that are important when developing your sourcing structure in Asia. The first is, does your company have a commitment to developing opportunities, including top management support, designation of an internal Asian procurement manager, merchandisers, technical staff who are willing to travel to Asia often, and support staff, including interpreters, translators to facilitate the communication with the Asian suppliers? This is basically who is going to manage your business in Asia. Are you going to be developing a team? Is it going to be a team of expats, of local employees? Are you going to have mixed culture that's going to foster the relationships locally? These are all important questions to ask yourself when you're developing this division. Does your company have sufficient financial resources to actively support your international expansion? This is something that's also extremely important. You have to create a budget for this division to understand whether you have the capabilities to afford developing your procurement in Asia. Does your company have the ability to acquire and analyze Asian market data? Obviously, you have to do your benchmarking. You have to research your suppliers, understand what pricing exists, see whether it's more competitive than where you're procuring now, and can you analyze the data that you're going to find? Many of our clients find that the data received in Asia is a little bit skewed and not always as accurate, or there are differentiations compared to other sources. In the end of the day, you always have to take the data with a grain of salt and not just look at it and base your decisions on it, but also look at external influences such as, what are you going to be doing there? Is it a necessity to be there? Are you looking eventually to also sell into Asia, and as a consequence you want to manufacture there? There's a whole series of questions that need to be asked. These are just individual points that can be looked at, but you have to look at the whole picture as a whole and see whether it makes sense to relocate there. Does your company have the ability to acquire familiarity with import and export transactions, dealing with logistical issues, negotiating letters of credit, dealing with freight forwarders, what export documentation, export licensing is required, and what import documentation and import licensing is needed when importing into your home jurisdiction? These are all important aspects that you need to familiarize yourself with when developing your procurement strategy in Asia. Each jurisdiction in Asia has their own regulations, their own rules, so you do need to research for your specific product lines what are the regulations that are there. Do you have sufficient resources to engage local consultants, attorneys, accountants in order to be protected should anything occur when developing your procurement division? This is extremely important and a point that shouldn't be ignored. Don't rely just on staff that you hire and you've only known for a minimal period of time. Make sure that you look at third-party service providers that can assist you with your benchmarking activities, with providing you with information on import and export logistical services, talking to banks in terms of letters of credit and cash flow functions, etc. It's really important to develop this network, have reliable people on the ground who can assist you should you have any questions. Does your company have the ability to establish a program for protection of your intellectual property, including trademark, patent registration, market monitoring, and enforcement strategy? This is something that should not be ignored. In fact, this is one of the first steps that you should be doing when you're going to start your procurement strategy anywhere in the world, as well as your sales strategy. There have been many cases where there are IP squatters that are sitting in China, sitting in Vietnam, sitting in Bangladesh, sitting in India, where they are registering companies' IP and limiting them from being able to either import or export. Registering your IP can be done very easily at minimal costs. It does take time to register the IP, but in general, jurisdictions have a first-come, first-served policy where if you register the IP first, then you're already protected until the length of time that the IP registration takes. So keep that in mind. It should really be one of the first things that you do. If you're already sourcing in China, it's something that you should be doing, even if you haven't done it yet. And again, put this on the top of your priority lists. The remaining items that I've listed here on this slide, again, the presentation will be distributed to you at the end of today, will give you a guidance also on other questions that should be asked. What's your short-term strategy? What's your long-term strategy? Are you going to be adding activities to your business scope as the years progress? Have you done your business plan? Have you set your goals and strategies for your market penetration as well as for your long-term growth? And keep in mind, you're going into a region that is still an emerging market. As a result of that, many of the rules and regulations in Asia, in all jurisdictions, are changing dramatically on a day-to-day basis, especially in the developing countries. As a consequence, if you create a business plan today, it might not be valid in 6 months' time. So you might have to keep updating and changing your business plan to suit and to fit with the laws and regulations that are occurring. Of course, in the more mature markets in Asia, like Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, here the regulations are not changing on a daily basis. There might be a few that change on an annual basis, but they usually don't impact your business plans. So keep that in mind when you're really going into the emerging markets. And I say this particularly for those of you that are sourcing and are looking for third-party manufacturers or looking to manufacture yourself or develop your own entity in these emerging markets. Keep updated on these laws and regulations, and this is why it's extremely important to develop your network of lawyers and consultants who can guide you through these changes that are occurring. Your checklist for your Asian operation. I've listed the top 10 pieces of advice that I can provide you when going into the Asian market. Of course, the list can be much more extensive, but I just want to go through the basics here of what you should be doing from day one and continue to be doing as the years progress. The first is establishing the right culture from day one. You cannot imagine the number of companies that come to me from Europe, from North America, South America, that want to implement their corporate culture into their Asian structure. This is just not going to work. You have to realize that you're going to have to adapt your philosophies, your company culture into an Asian one in order to be able to fit the local people you're employing and to fit the dynamics of that region and that country. Make sure you're open to new cultures, make sure you're open to new ways of doing business, and really try to instill that from day one. Again, I can't emphasize this more. Register your intellectual property, whether it's trademarks or patents, regardless of whether you are sourcing for products, selling products, or even just providing services. For all of these things, you should be registering your trademark. The key is to understand what exists out there. You can register your trademarks in each single jurisdiction, or you can also look at the Madrid Protocol, which has over 40 countries listed, and a lot of countries in Asia are in that list, where you can do one application for all jurisdictions. So investigate, talk to your IP lawyers, and see what they would advise for you. Look at the licenses needed to export from Asia. Are there product quotas that exist when importing into your home jurisdiction? When you're importing to your home jurisdiction, are there licensing requirements? What are the customs duty rates, etc.? Understand the full trade flow that exists and what needs to be done. Make sure you vet your suppliers, your customers, your partners, your service providers. Don't just rely on looking on globalsources.com or alibaba.com to find suppliers. Make sure you actually travel, visit them, do your due diligence, and see whether they actually exist. Don't make any down payments on manufacturing products without really knowing that they are there. Of course, this requires a step of commitment from you in order to budget for these trips and these vettings. But it does give you greater support long term in knowing that they exist, they really manufacture, and you've done your due diligence on them. Vetting your suppliers is something that should be done on a regular basis, at least once a year, to make sure that they're in compliance according to what you need. Many very large retailers today, like Walmart, Target, etc. in North America, or Lidl and Aldi in Europe, they require to have, or they have very strict social compliance regulations when dealing with manufacturers. So it is important for you to investigate and make sure that they really exist and they really promise you that they can deliver. If you're setting up your structures in Asia, make sure you do frequent health checks and internal audits. Try to have your finance team be involved in that step, traveling to the subsidiaries and making sure that everything is in compliance, all your accounting standards are correct, and making sure there's no fraud-related issues that are occurring. Appoint the appropriate directors and senior management personnel. This is a little bit of a gray area, but make sure you develop a team that is not only familiar with the company, the philosophy of the company, but also that they understand the product lines, that they might already have experience in dealing with Asia, having worked for other companies, and try to have a mixed culture. Nowadays, what a lot of multinationals and SMEs are doing in Asia is that they're trying to develop a mixed culture where they might have two general managers, one is a Westerner and one is a local, fostering and maintaining the balance within the entity. Assess internal control systems. You might be doing this already in your headquarters where you have internal control systems and you're monitoring these internal control systems. You can develop these very easily in Asia, just adapting them again to local cultures and local practices. But it's a key essential. Do this from day one, even if you have only a one-man show locally in Asia or in any of the jurisdictions. Develop these internal control systems from day one so that as you grow the company, the first person that was there can teach and guide based on these internal control systems. And again, it's part of doing health checks and internal audits. Monitor these control systems to make sure that they're really occurring. In Asia, one of the key things is developing a fraud response plan. Fraud is extremely common, especially internally within companies. Don't rely on your staff to be forthcoming. Many Asians are actually quite shy, and they tend to lose face if they stab somebody in the back. One of the key items that I have found working in Asia is traveling to each of the offices, inviting certain key people out for lunch on a one-to-one basis, and you learn a lot more about what's happening internally in your company versus having group meetings or group discussions. People are much more forthcoming and less shy if you meet with them on a one-to-one basis. Make sure you have somebody who's willing to take phone calls or anonymous tips in relation to fraud. You should also have fraud response plans in terms of your suppliers. There are many merchandisers out there who will expect kickbacks from suppliers. As a consequence, you should also utilize your suppliers in terms of monitoring and developing fraud response plans. You don't want to damage your relationships with your suppliers because of staff issues. And lastly, obtain advice. Again, utilize third-party providers to give you advice and tell you whether things are compliant or not compliant. I have many clients who come to me after they've actually done a transaction. They knew from the moment that they heard how the transaction was going to be developed that something was not right, but because of the speed of the business and the efficiency, they didn't want to lose out on the deal, and lo and behold, once the transaction was done, problems started forming. Take your time. One of the key things that I've learned in Asia is that a lot of Asians play on the patience of Westerners, and as a consequence, you get into trouble at the end of the day. Nothing should be that much in a rush that you can't check and see whether things are correct or are in compliance. So trade solutions in Asia, I tried to find a map that would actually fit all of Asia inside. Unfortunately, I couldn't fit Australia, but Australia is part of the Asia-Pacific region and should be considered in this. I've highlighted the key countries where most manufacturing is occurring. Smaller countries like Cambodia and Myanmar are picking up tremendously, and there are a lot of incentives, government incentives, promoting manufacturing in those countries. But this gives you an idea of the region, the extent of the region, how big it is, and how you need to develop your plan. I'd like to provide you now with options, and I'm starting with options that are low risk but also low commitment, and I'll be going through and highlighting then where your risk increases and where your commitment to the markets increase. The first is obviously selling with no representation, and there are many foreign companies that feel that it is vital for their business to be present in Asia in terms of developing their procurement strategies. Not every company, however, has the resources to immediately set up their own entity or send expatriate staff to Asia. At the same time, they may not feel complete loyalty from the local suppliers, trading agents, logistics providers, etc. A foreign company has the option of establishing a network of logistics providers all around Asia to assist in the export of goods, as suppliers are located in various regions. Sourcing in Asia without any local warehousing facility is naturally the first step for many, but if any company wishes to expand and use the full potential of the market, a local presence may be unavoidable, as consolidated shipments may have to occur to customers all around the world, especially to the big retailers. Now, what I have seen through the economic crisis, and I'll give you a case study here of a Spanish SME, was the fact that they were on a tight budget. They didn't want to take any risk. They didn't want to have any commitment to the Asian market, but they had a whole series of suppliers located there. In order to avoid a high capital investment, what they did is they created a structure locally in Barcelona. They had a team of procurement specialists that were familiar with the product, familiar with the company, the philosophy of the company. Each procurement specialist was a specialist in a specific region. For example, one was specialized in China, another one in Vietnam, another one in India, etc. And what they did is that they traveled frequently to Asia, participating at trade shows to look for new suppliers, and also combining that with meetings with existing suppliers and doing quality control, testing, etc. as they were there. Naturally, these individuals were traveling close to every 2 months to the region, but that was minimal cost compared to actually relocating somebody to that specific country and setting up their own entity. Again, it's important when sourcing in China to be able to register your trademarks. I'll give you another case study here. There was an American client of ours who has over 100 suppliers, specifically in China, and one of these suppliers was losing out on a specific deal, and as a consequence, in bad faith, they registered the American client's trademark in China. As a consequence, what happened is that the customs bureaus did not allow the goods to be exported from the other 99 suppliers. And right now they're going through legal procedures in order to obtain their trademark back. So it's not just when you are selling into a market where you want to protect your brand name. It's also when you're exporting from a market that you want to protect your brand name because of what customs bureaus can do when you're exporting. The next option is looking for sourcing agents. So rather than actually setting up your procurement team in your home jurisdiction, which you may still want to do, also looking at sourcing agents that have a wider network and a wider spread in terms of suppliers. Of course, the greatest challenge for foreign buyers is to find dedicated, reliable, and professional agents. You want to have a long-term focus, consistent strategy, and make sure that they are working on your behalf. Obviously, an agent could be a manufacturer who's in a similar field as you, or an import-export company that is well established and has an extensive network of suppliers readily available. Agents generally both buy and sell their products, or they can act on commission. Sourcing agents can be found throughout Asia. If you're looking at specific markets, you might find sourcing agents in China that are specific to certain product lines and not every single product that you're dealing in. My suggestion would be not to put all your eggs in one basket, not to rely on just one agent to research and develop the relationships with your suppliers, but rather look at non-exclusive agreements and work with several agents until you find one that really suits you or find many that really suits you. Also, look at sourcing agents that are specialized in that specific country. You cannot expect a sourcing agent in China to know suppliers necessarily in Vietnam or India. So look at sourcing agents in specific markets and broaden your network as well. The next step is outsourcing your buying office, and I've actually provided here a case study of Clayco Group. There are service providers locally in Asia that have developed services where the foreign company can utilize their own solution and their own network without having to set up their own entity with fixed cost or lose control over the order transactions to local agents or logistics providers. Once you have this outsourced buying office, the second step would be that these companies with their own representation can also outsource their local sourcing, invoicing, and warehousing. The effectiveness of this solution provides the company with a customized outsourcing service for a smooth and trouble-free market entry. The foreign company may continue to utilize the service providers for as long as they wish, but usually after a few years, clients have gained significant experience and access to the market and are ready to set up their own entity and have their own team. At this point, it's also possible for the foreign company to then take over the employees, which so far have been working for them underneath the service provider structure. So basically, for example, Clayco Group, what we do is we provide the internal infrastructure to a foreign company, and we also employ merchandisers on our payroll who work solely for your company and are familiar only with your product lines to deal with suppliers, manufacturers. So basically you're creating your outsourced buying office locally in the region. You have merchandisers on the ground in a specific country that cater to various suppliers or manufacturers in China and Asia and are communicating on a daily basis with your team abroad. This is just an interim solution. Obviously, what we have seen is that eventually clients then do set up their own entities. If it makes sense for them, we transfer the employees to their new entities and they work then on their own. Looking at export regulations and quality control. Well, to start off with, I wanted to look at the quality control issue. There are many companies on the ground like TÜV, SGS, etc. that do quality control testing. It is important to be able to do your quality control before the goods are shipped. One of the key aspects in many of the Asian countries is that your first order might be fantastic, and as the orders grow bigger and become more valuable, the quality actually goes down. One of the key issues that we've seen over the years is that also as suppliers tend to get more orders, not only from yourselves but also from other companies, they tend to then subcontract. And if you haven't vetted these subcontractors, then you're also going to have issues with the quality. As a result, this is why I've mentioned earlier, it's important to vet your suppliers on an annual basis to make sure that they are not subcontracting. If they are subcontracting, to know and understand who they're subcontracting to so that you can vet them as well. So definitely look at the quality control issues. Look at the export regulations as well. Do you need a certificate of origin? From which country do you need that certificate of origin? Are there specific forms which need to be completed? Are there product quotas when you're exporting to your home jurisdictions? These are all things that need to be investigated clearly when exporting from Asia. One of the key items that I've come to understand dealing with companies that are exporting to the EU or the US is understanding who is the importer of record and whether you have any anti-dumping duty, whether there are implications on VAT, what are the customs duty rates, etc. So it's looking at both ends of the supply chain, looking at the point of when you're exporting and looking at the point of when you're importing. One of the key aspects that I also want to mention here that maybe a lot of people are not aware of, at least from myself being based in Asia, I was not aware of this principle, was the principle of first sale, which allows you to be able to reduce import duty in a country. The first sale rule is collaborative, and proper legal process is available in the US and EU markets for importers as well as global exporters, where they can substantially reduce duties and taxes. To simply explain it, the first sale rule can be applied when there are 2 or more sales that give rise to an importation of merchandise. As long as all the rules substantiating first sale are met and documentation is established, the basis for dutiable value can be the first sale between the factory and the middleman or vendor, rather than the middleman, vendor, and the importer. What's remarkable about using the first sale import pricing is that it benefits every tier of a multi-tier transaction. Factories and vendors do not have to lower their prices or their margins in order to attract US buyers or EU buyers, and US or EU importers are able to reduce the landed cost of their goods. All documentation requirements need to be met in order to be able to achieve first sale, but it was a principle that I was not aware of, and it's something that's used quite often in the US as well as in the EU. And again, you should be talking to certain supply chain lawyers, experts in your home jurisdiction to see if this can be qualified for you. When you're developing your procurement structure, one of the things that you can also do is re-invoice via a Hong Kong or Singapore company. Basically, the advantage of Hong Kong or Singapore when dealing with the Asian structure is that Hong Kong and Singapore are more mature markets compared to the emerging markets like China, Vietnam, Bangladesh. In addition to that, you have the capability of having a virtual office concept rather than setting up operational entities with employees, renting office space, etc. Naturally, you can do that, but obviously your costs will increase. So the point that you can have these virtual office concepts is an added benefit and value to you. One of the other advantages of Hong Kong and Singapore are the low tax rates that are available on profits that are made, on the margins that are made in those entities compared to other emerging markets. What are the advantages of utilizing this Hong Kong or Singapore company? Well, basically, you can handle trade documentation between your suppliers and retailers, manage letters of credit, trade finance activities with the banks locally in those jurisdictions. You can handle all corporate compliance issues associated with the Hong Kong company, and obviously you have tax optimization solutions that exist. A Hong Kong company or Singapore company provides greater flexibility in how a product can also be sold. As an Asian exporter, the Hong Kong company represents an opportunity for the importer to leverage off its existing retail, design, and purchasing networks and to sell into new markets, with the advantage that these new markets can be anywhere in the world and not only just your home jurisdiction. The key is that the sales made from the company would be booked on an FOB Asian port basis, and goods can be shipped directly to large customers. Moreover, this frees up capital and inventory that would otherwise be tied up through stocks held in the warehouses. Another key advantage in both Hong Kong and Singapore is the fact, when dealing with China, that you can buy in RMB. As a buyer from the China market, having an RMB account allows you to increase pricing transparency, improve supplier relationships, widen your supplier base, mainly meaning suppliers that were not able to invoice in US dollar or euro before. In addition to that, you can also open multi-currency accounts in both jurisdictions, which means that you can also pay suppliers in the local currencies of the other Asian jurisdictions that you're working in. What's the benefit to you for developing such a structure? Well, obviously you have greater flexibility in terms of how you sell your products and to whom you sell. You have the choice of whether to sell ex-warehouse using your domestic trading structure in your home jurisdiction, or by selling FOB Asian port basis by developing this international trade program. So now you have two options in terms of how you sell. The FOB Asian port means that you do not have to incur freight, insurance, and warehousing charges. This means you can sell at lower prices while maintaining your profit margins. By having your Hong Kong or Singapore entity, you have much greater face to your Asian suppliers because you're showing a certain level of commitment to the Asian market and the growth of your business. Naturally, these suppliers may not know that you don't have a physical operational entity there, and that it's just a virtual office concept. You might have less credit risk. Many customers will only buy on open account from domestic suppliers, but will agree to open LCs to an overseas supplier. So having your Hong Kong or Singapore company as a supplier means you're more likely to receive LCs for their orders. You can improve your cash flow and free up your capital. Your customers will be more inclined to use LCs if their orders are opened up in Hong Kong or Singapore. Bank credits, you'll have the advantage of receiving bank credits for your companies, not immediately, but definitely over a 1 to 2 year period, obviously depending on your cash flow, depending on the success and performance of your entities. You have low taxes in both jurisdictions compared to other emerging markets. In Hong Kong it's 16.5%, and in Singapore it's 17%. You can market your products internationally, so now you'd be considered an Asian supplier, and as a consequence it could create options for new customers, and a certain level of confidentiality can be also created. The benefits for your customer and your suppliers, well, for your customers, they can buy direct now from Asia. Distribution costs, logistics costs are obviously lower. You can obviously do shipment coordination directly where you can pick and pack and consolidate shipments to customers. And you'll have an Asian outlook. So your customer's Asian buying office can deal with your Hong Kong or Singapore office without any time or language differences. What we've seen is that many large retailers, global retailers like Walmart, Target, Lidl, they have Hong Kong operations as well, and usually these buying offices want to buy locally. The advantages for your suppliers is obviously communication. If you develop an operational and physical office in Hong Kong or Singapore, then usually the local languages are available. You're also in the same time zone, and again, it's prestige, making your suppliers feel comfortable that you have an office locally and you can speak to each other within the same time zone area. The next step after that is you can obviously still continue to use your Hong Kong and Singapore trading company, but you may find that you need people on the ground physically in your specific Asian jurisdiction to act as a representative office to do merchandising, quality control, and follow-ups with your suppliers. So as a consequence, you're developing a more complex structure, but slowly. One of the key things that your representative office obviously does is market research for new suppliers, quality control, business liaison, negotiations, and having really people on the ground that deal directly with the suppliers. The next step after creating a liaison or representative office is taking your structure to a more complex category where you're still keeping your Hong Kong or Singapore entity as the main trading house, but you now have a physical entity in your specific jurisdiction that's going to cater to potentially buying locally and exporting overseas, so that your final entity is the final exporter. I've listed here an example with China. You can set up a trading entity in China, buy from your suppliers. You would be the final exporter, and as a consequence, you would be the one that would be able to receive the VAT refund. For some companies, this is vital and important. For others, less so. But it gives you the option, depending on where the largest quantity of your suppliers is existing, to develop these local structures. But again, it is a key thing to remember that when you're developing these local structures in these emerging markets, that rules and regulations are different compared to a more black and white system in Singapore or in Hong Kong. As a result, make sure you do your research and your benchmarking and you know how the system works. Another option is obviously not utilizing Hong Kong or Singapore, but going directly into each of your Asian jurisdictions and setting up an entity there. I've given an example here for China, but you could go directly from your home jurisdiction and set up structures in Vietnam, in India, in China without having a holding structure or a regional headquarter that could be established, for example, out of Hong Kong or in Singapore. It might be that you only have suppliers in one jurisdiction, and as a consequence, you don't need to develop a complex structure. But again, this might be a short-term perspective and not a long-term perspective. So keep that in mind. We've had a lot of clients that initially set up their structures in Vietnam and later on realized that they were expanding their network of suppliers to other jurisdictions in Asia for cost reasons, and as a result they wanted to have a headquarter that was maintaining all the relationships, and they had to then go through a restructuring process which cost them more in the long term than just actually having done it straight from the beginning. So keep that in mind as well. Now I just wanted to go through some key considerations when you are going to set up your structures in the Asian market. This is generally if you are setting up your subsidiaries locally, and again I've only listed 10 items here, but as mentioned the list is much longer. The first is, and the first 3 points are actually interrelated with each other: lack of control and communication, turning a blind eye, and ethical situations. Whether you set up in a jurisdiction like Vietnam, India, Myanmar, Bangladesh, China, etc., you have to make sure that you still have a team on the ground in your home jurisdiction that is supervising everything. Don't turn a blind eye. Don't think just because you're in Asia that you can do absolutely everything and things can be done under the table. You still have certain ethical guidelines that you need to follow. The world nowadays is becoming transparent. There are much stricter guidelines in North America and in Europe in terms of subsidiaries that are being established, especially according to the Bribery Act. So make sure that you keep control, that you communicate on a daily basis with your subsidiaries. You know exactly what is going on, who is in charge, and who is the reporting body. And again, this all leads me then to point 4, which is hiring inexperienced foreign and or local staff. You can't properly implement a control and communication system if you don't have the right staff on the ground, not only in your Asian jurisdiction, but also in your home jurisdiction. You need to make sure that the teams work together, collaborate together, and have the right experience and philosophy to implement things accordingly, whether it's internal control systems, doing internal audits, etc. You really need to have people that are experienced. Again, understand the cultural differences. Don't get frustrated by the ways of doing business in the various Asian countries. Make sure you foster a mixed cultural system whereby not only your local employees in the Asian jurisdiction are learning your Western habits, but your Western employees are learning also the local cultural systems. It's important to foster these in both jurisdictions. Know your suppliers, know your customers, understand what the needs are, and vet them. Do your due diligence. As I had mentioned earlier, if your suppliers are subcontracting, whether it's suppliers or logistics providers, make sure you're aware of it and you're vetting also these subcontractors. Be aware also of your end clients. Where are they based? One of the key things or the trends that we've seen over time, particularly in China, is that companies that were focused solely on sourcing 10 years ago are now changing their business models to include sales into the Chinese market. And they've had to structure new supply chains in order to be able to cater to these new markets. So keep that in mind as well. Asia is not only a haven for production, it's also a haven for sales, and the sales are increasing. So again, it's important to understand what is your short-term strategy and what is your long-term strategy. Be aware of government interaction. One of the things that I have learned over the years is don't trust what the government dictates in terms of preferential policies. If nothing is provided to you in writing with the chop of the government or a signature of an official, then don't believe it. One of the things that I've heard in the regions of Myanmar and Bangladesh is that there's a lot of under-table money that's flowing to certain government heads in order to get certain preferential treatments. If these government heads are ever kicked out, or they just forget that they've been giving you a preferential treatment and they don't care that they're getting kickbacks anymore, then you're losing out and you have to completely change your business models. So without getting anything in writing, don't believe what they're always saying. And again, it helps to talk to third parties like lawyers and consultants locally who can guide you with these situations. Don't get yourselves into trouble day one, because you might find that in 5 or 10 years' time there will be problems that exist. And when you're developing your subsidiaries locally in Asia, you've got to keep in mind that profit won't be made from day one. It'll take time to develop profit, and you want to make sure that you have good preferential policies to minimize tax systems at that later date. In addition, abnormal or unexpected methods of payment. This happens frequently in Asia, where suppliers will tell you how they want to be paid. Although they are based in China, they have a random bank account that's based in a British Virgin Islands company or Seychelles company or Hong Kong company. If things feel abnormal or things just feel not right, get advice and see whether you're being tricked or duped into doing something that you don't want to do. It is much easier to fix things right from the beginning rather than fixing them at a later stage where penalties may arise and more cost may arise for you, which may not be in the budget that you plan for when developing your business. So again, keep all of these things in mind when developing your structures. That is the end of today's webinar presentation. I hope I was able to provide you with a few tips and business models in terms of the complexities that exist when dealing in the Asian region. I could go into so much more detail about each Asian jurisdiction, but I think it would take too much time to go into that. Again, if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. We can be reached at the following numbers. In addition to that, if you are interested in receiving our monthly magazine, which is ChinaInvest.biz, then please do go to our homepage, subscribe, and add your email address. You'll also be updated on our webinars. You can also follow us on LinkedIn. We have weekly updates on tax and legal alerts in all the jurisdictions that we operate in. And if you're interested in listening into our old webinars, you can go to our YouTube channel where they are listed, and you can also listen to them. So again, thank you very much for joining us. If you are interested in participating in our next webinar in May, it is on accessing the Southeast Asian market and what are the best business models that can be developed for that. So again, thank you for joining us, and I wish you all a pleasant evening. Goodbye.